Okay, let's speak now to Dan Perry. He's an Israeli affairs analyst and the former chair of the Foreign Press Association in Israel. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Thank you so much for your time today. So the Israeli government's proposed plan to establish this humanitarian city in southern Gaza where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians would be confined continues to receive backlash, not just from within Israel, but abroad. How is all this criticism going down with the less extreme right-wing aspects of the Israeli government, do you think? Will they continue to pursue this plan, in your opinion?
I am doubtful, actually, because if this plan comes to fruition, it would involve, by all indications, a very prolonged process where many months and maybe up to a year would be required to build it, and then Israel probably would have to maintain it. Israel does not have the funds or the energy or the desire to do any such thing. I think this has to be viewed in the context of the current negotiations, where the very reporting of such a plan might be an effort to put pressure on Hamas to show more flexibility. I agree with Lapid that it is security and political and logistical nightmare. I would add it's ethically inadmissible.
If they do proceed with the building of the city, it could harm hostage and ceasefire talks, which are currently taking place here in Qatar. But do you think that is actually Prime Minister Netanyahu's intention? Is he just looking for another way to prolong the war?
It's pretty well established by now that there is more than a small reason to suspect that Netanyahu is trying to draw out negotiations. There's a joke in Israel that when there's one hostage left, Netanyahu will insist on receiving him or her in stages. It is more than suspected that this is the case. However, at the same time, the Israeli politics remains torn between a strong desire to end the war and an equally strong sense that Israel cannot tolerate Hamas remaining as an armed militia in Gaza. So I have to say, if the other side wants to put maximal pressure on Netanyahu, then what they need to do is not only say publicly, and not just privately, but publicly, that they are willing to hand over the strip to a civilian government, probably the PA, but also that they're willing to disarm and hand over the arms over to the PA. Should that be said publicly and not deniably, then the pressure on Netanyahu to end the war immediately would be monumental. You already see polls suggesting over 70% want this. It would become 90%. There's a very quick way to do this, and it basically goes through Hamas. But no, I don't think this so-called humanitarian city that some are calling a concentration camp will come to fruition, because the Israeli public will be tremendously opposed to any procedure that prolongs their embroilment in Gaza for another year or more. They want this war to end.
Dan, various polls show that despite being hugely unpopular a few years back, Prime Minister Netanyahu's popularity at home has bumped since the Iran war. How do you square that with the growing condemnation that Israel has received for its war in Gaza?
Well, a number of things. First of all, those in Israel who care about the condemnation are already opposed Netanyahu, and others have priced in the condemnation and even assumed that no matter what Israel does, the world has a simplistic view of its predicament, and it has to basically be ignored. Right or wrong, that is the view of some Israelis. Secondly, the Iran war was a great success. Much as the Gaza war I would classify as a failure, and the situation with Lebanon and Israel's thrashing of Hezbollah was also quite considerably a success and an important one. The Iran war was amazing. I mean, anyone who says otherwise doesn't really know what happened. And you're obviously going to see a bit of a bump from that. But that said, the bump has not been that great. In Israel, basically, the vote is by party. Israel has two blocks. The Netanyahu bloc won 64 seats out of 120 in the last election, and all the polls show that he wouldn't win more than 50 today, meaning he would be 20 seats, or about 20% behind the opposition. Now, that may have changed by a percentage point or two, but it actually was less significant a bump than I expected, given the dimensions of the success against Iran.
And we saw earlier Netanyahu back in court as hearings resume on his corruption trial and other trials. Do you think anything will come from those cases against him, given the calls from the US president to drop the charges against him and this increased popularity, if you like, back home?
The popularity, as I say, is only slightly increased, so I don't think that's a factor, nor should it be when it comes to legal proceedings. The cases are extremely problematic in the sense that the trial's gone on for 4 or 5 years, and the appeals process will go on for another 2 or 3 years, and it becomes absurd. And there is public impatience with the whole thing, especially given the very strong possibility it will lead to a pardon at the end of the day. The trials are right now not popular, even though most people do think, I think, if you did a poll on this, that he probably is guilty of at least some of the charges against him. As for Trump's interference, now that is a global historic disgrace. I mean, it's essential in the relationships between countries and in geopolitics that one country's head of government not interfere in the legal system of another country. But what can we expect of Trump, who sent his Homeland Security chief to Poland to basically tell the Poles that their populist, far-right, anti-American, pro-Putin candidate must be the president? Then they'll have a friend in the White House, and that worked in Poland. Who knows? Trump may be thinking that that could work in Israel. I don't put it past Trump to actually tell the Israeli judiciary that they have to cancel the charges against Bibi, or Israel will face tariffs. Anything is possible with Trump.
Okay. Dan Perry, Israeli affairs analyst and former chair of the Foreign Press Association in Israel. Thank you for your time. We're joined by Dan Perry. He's an Israeli affairs analyst and former chair of the Foreign Press Association in Israel. He joins us from Tel Aviv. Good to see you again, Dan. So the Israeli government's proposed plan to establish this humanitarian city in southern Gaza, where hundreds of thousands of Palestinians would be confined, continues to receive backlash from within Israel and abroad. Even, as we mentioned, a former Israeli prime minister now alleging the idea resembles a Nazi concentration camp. How is this criticism going down with the less extreme right-wing aspects of the Israeli government?
Look, the Israeli government as a whole, I fear, is now identified as pretty far right-wing extreme, because that's the forces that have been guiding events, because they control the government. I have to also say, Malene, Lapid did not call it a Nazi concentration camp. That word is extremely loaded in Israel, and he would never have done that. The Nazis put people in ovens and killed them with Cyclone B gas. No, but it is absolutely looking like, a concentration camp, not unlike what was done to Japanese Americans in World War II and worse. So it's bad. And the main thing I can say about this is that it's unlikely to happen, because the Israeli public wants this war to be over. The pressure is enormous on the government to find a way to end it. They may conceivably find ways to drag it out for a little bit longer, but especially with the Americans pressing for an end to the war as well, I can hardly conceive of Israel building a refugee city by whatever label you slap on it that will cause Israel to be further enmeshed in Gaza for another year or more. The idea beyond the practicalities of it, beyond the moral dubiousness of it, is extremely unlikely to happen, and I have to view it as a negotiating tactic, essentially.
Various polls show that despite being hugely unpopular a few years back, Prime Minister Netanyahu's popularity at home has taken a bump up since its war in Iran. How do you square that with the growing condemnation that Israel has received for its war in Gaza?
Well, for one thing, the people who support Netanyahu have sort of priced the condemnation into their larger political equation, meaning they don't care. For another, the bump has been small. It's been 1 or 2 or maybe 3 percentage points, and that is actually surprising to me, given what was a considerable scale of Israel's success in Iran, where they controlled the skies of Iran, eliminated much of the Iranian military leadership within minutes, set back the nuclear program and the missile program considerably. All that is really quite something. So Netanyahu, I think, expected a bigger bump. The way things are right now, if elections were to be held soon, he may well still lose. And I would actually add that his main prospects for finding a way to become electable again go not through a continuation of this unbelievably ugly war in Gaza, but rather through finding a way to end it, perhaps collecting normalization with Saudi Arabia and other countries, and repositioning himself as a leader of Israel that stands for something approaching peace, as opposed to this abomination that we observe.
Well, on that point, how would you say Israel's long-term standing internationally has been impacted by Prime Minister Netanyahu and his government's actions over the past 2 years?
it's clearly not being impacted very well when he himself and others are wanted for war crimes by various courts at The Hague. And when people speak of boycotts of Israel, and the Europeans are threatening to reconsider Israel's associate membership status. But he has a big friend in the White House in Trump who doesn't care about humanitarian issues or much else beyond the most vulgar transactions. And Trump also, it must be said from an Israeli perspective, in favor of Trump, has no illusions about the depth and scale of the predicament facing Israel in its fight against various genocidal jihadi terrorist groups like Hamas. Trump is sympathetic to Israel, and that might certainly help Netanyahu. I think Israel's overall international standing will suffer very greatly if Netanyahu should win another election, and they should continue the policies which basically are dragging Israel in a direction of a right-wing religious state, away from democratic norms, towards indifference to opinion in the West, and also, frankly, towards a place where they will be at loggerheads with American Jews.
Dan Perry, Israeli affairs analyst and former chair of the Foreign Press Association in Israel. Thank you.
Thank you, Elaine.